Reflections from Torch Trust, focusing on Christian faith and sight loss.
Hello, and a warm welcome to Reflections from Torch Trust, the programme that focuses on faith and disability in today's world. I'm your host, Marilyn Baker. Today we mark Remembrance Sunday. The official Remembrance Day falls this year on Tuesday, the 11th of November. At the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, we pause for 2 minutes to remember those who lost their lives during the First World War and in conflict since. Wearing a red poppy is part of this tradition, a symbol of remembrance inspired by the poppies that grew on the battlefields of Flanders. Many churches also mark Remembrance Day on the nearest Sunday, with poppies and the customary 2-minute silence. But for blind and partially sighted people, taking part in these customs can be complicated. Without visual reminders, it's easy to forget to get a poppy, especially if you don't have a personal connection to the day. And even if you have one, putting it on correctly can be difficult without guidance. Knowing exactly when the silence begins during a service can also be unclear without sight cues. Producer Linn Davies and her friend Matthew Horspool recorded a full Insights episode on this very topic. Here's the first part of their conversation.
Remembrance service is something that when I moved to the UK I understood to be very important.
It's something I've always grown up with, being in the Church of England, so I'm not really sure I fully appreciated how important it was as a child. And then when I became an adult, I sort of realised that adults who didn't normally go to church might have made a special effort to go to church on Remembrance Day, or might have at least, stopped for a minute's silence or 2 minutes silence, or done something for remembrance. And then I made friends with people who weren't Church of England, and then I realised that actually their churches didn't do as much for remembrance as we did, and I started to really sort of get a picture of actually this is quite a ceremonial occasion, really, and it's not so much a religious occasion as a civic occasion, but it's still very important.
Yeah. So in case there are any other foreigners or people who aren't familiar with Remembrance Sunday listening, Remembrance Sunday is when we take some time out to remember those who fell in is it the Second World War?
It's the First World War.
It's the first, you see. It's a good thing that we've got somebody who's a bit more expert than I am on this.
Yeah, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month.
Right.
11.
And we've been talking about ceremonious services before on Insights and how they might be different. One thing that you mentioned is that a lot more people are going to make an effort to go to church, which will definitely change how the church service will be, because bigger crowd means different people, different seating arrangements perhaps, and so on and so forth. So yeah, let's dive into this a little bit from a sight loss point of view.
Yeah, definitely. And just before we do that, the other thing to comment on about more people attending church is the type of people who are attending church as well. So you might get, for example, military people in the church, but you might also get ex-military people in the church, some of whom may have lost their sight in the military. So actually, the likelihood of there being more people with sight loss in the church than normal is quite high, either because they're blinded in the military or because they're ex-military and have grown older and therefore lost their sight due to old age.
Right, so there is a high probability of having blind or partially sighted people in the service as well. And thinking about organisations like Blind Veterans UK, for example, there might be people from there who would like to attend church on that particular Sunday.
Yes, especially if you live sort of down in Brighton where Blind Veterans UK is. Yeah, that's a very good point. I hadn't actually thought about that one.
Yeah, and I think there are a few more veterans organisations around the country, but I think the Brighton one is probably the best known.
There's one in Scotland somewhere, isn't there? I can't remember what they're called now. But yeah, they're around. If you've got one near you, you'll know that you've got one near you, and it would be politic for you to look out for them.
Definitely. So what are some of the things you would say is important to keep in mind during this type of service?
Yeah, sure. So I think culturally, one of the things that people often think about when it comes to remembrance is wearing the poppy. The poppy was quite a significant symbol of World War One because, of course, it grew over all the graves, didn't it? And so poppies are now sold to raise money for the Royal British Legion. Blind people might actually struggle to acquire a poppy. That you can get them all over the place, but knowing where all over the place is actually quite difficult. I know that certainly when I need to get a poppy, I really struggle because I do all my shopping online. So all of the places where I'd normally get a poppy from, like, Tesco's and things like that, you can't just add one to your grocery basket. You actually have to go, into a place and get one. And I must admit, because I don't see people wearing poppies, I have to get a bit of a nudge sometimes to go and actually buy one. So that is actually a problem. And then wearing them, I think if you've worn a poppy for a few years, you probably get the idea. But certainly the first time I wore a poppy, I really had to think about it and really had to be told specifically, explicitly how to wear it, in terms of it has to go on the left-hand side, or is it the right-hand side? You see, even now, I'm struggling to think how to explain it to someone else. It goes where your heart is, and the leaf points at 11 o'clock. And that is something that I think probably a sighted person would just take for granted because they would see everybody else wearing their poppies. Whereas I think a blind person, certainly I really needed to be explicitly told that information.
Yes, we do actually do Remembrance Sunday at my church, even though it isn't an Anglican church. And last year on Remembrance Sunday, I was leading the worship, not being quite aware of how important Remembrance Sunday is. And I came up to the front, and the first thing somebody said to me before the service started was, "Where's your poppy?" And I was just a bit like, "Where's my what?" And then somebody had to come and explain to me that, yeah, we wear poppies in this country for this purpose and so on and so forth. Luckily, the pastor's wife did have an extra poppy that she put on my lapel, so I didn't have to worry about the way that it came on or anything like that. But when I hear you talk about it, I think that I probably would have possibly gotten it the wrong way around had I done it myself. And you're right, it is very hard to get poppies from everywhere. Even if I go to my local supermarket, because I don't see poppies, I don't have a reminder of them. And I think this is sometimes the problem when you're blind. Sighted people see things around them all the time and it serves as external reminders. We don't have them. So I'm not going to be likely to ask somebody at my supermarket to go, "Oh, could I please have a poppy?" What I think would be a great idea around Remembrance Sunday, maybe a couple of weeks leading up to it, is, when you do your online shopping and you got your coupons and you asked to put in all of that stuff, they could have a reminder coming up saying, "Would you like to add a poppy to your basket?" Because that, for me, would definitely be the easiest way to both get the external reminder and to purchase one. But I think this is one for the supermarket giants, and we need to take it to them, really.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think technically you can get them online. I think you can get them through the Royal British Legion website. But like you say, it's the reminder aspect. It's sort of remembering to get them and remembering to get them in time. So I have a concert coming up where I'll need to wear a poppy. And because we're doing this podcast, I've remembered that I need to go out and get one. But had we not been doing this podcast, I probably wouldn't have remembered until the rehearsal on the day of the concert, by which point ordering one online is a little bit too late, really. I have to sort of, get somebody to go out to a shop with me between the rehearsal and the concert to go and get a poppy sorted out. And then it feels like a chore, which it really shouldn't do. But, because you're sort of in the moment and haven't really got time to do it, you then sort of resent it, which is not really how you're supposed to feel about the poppy at all.
No, but I think this is more than about the poppy, though. It's just the fact that we don't have the external reminders and we get to know about things late because we get reminded of them late, and then everything would feel like a chore. But you certainly wouldn't want to feel that on that particular day because, no, it isn't a chore. But there could be better reminder setters out there.
How did you find pinning the poppy on? I can do it now, but you get, usually with a poppy, you get a straight pin. It's not a safety pin, although you could use a safety pin if you wanted to. But you'll get this straight pin that you have to sort of pin through your clothes so you get a hole where the poppy stalk can go in. And I mean, actually, the process of figuring out how to do that took longer than I'm probably prepared to admit on this podcast.
Well, when I was wearing a poppy last year, the pastor's wife actually came and kindly put it on me because I was a bit like, ooh, I didn't know. And I felt like I had committed a massive faux pas. So this is where cultures meet and, funny cultural exchanges happen. So she did that for me. So I didn't pay much mind to it. But afterwards, I had a look at the poppy as I took it off, and then I realised they had that long stalk. So it's something I'm not too familiar with, but maybe I should order one just after this podcast. So moving along, we have discussed poppies and the challenge of remembering to buy them as well as putting them in place.
Now, let's return to Lynn and Matthew. In the second part of their conversation, they speak more practically about how churches can support blind and partially sighted people who want to take part in remembrance.
Are there any other things to be aware of for Remembrance Sunday?
I think for most churches, just being aware of the idea that there might very well be more people with sight loss than you are used to. So make sure there's extra people around who can help if need be. Maybe only bring them in if they need to be brought in. So maybe they're members of the congregation who can sit in the congregation, but there's a signal that says, hang on, we've got an extra person. Can you help this extra person with sight loss? And making sure that service sheets and things like that are accessible. Don't necessarily produce extra large print versions of them, but make sure that the print is easy to follow and all of that sort of thing. And then think quite carefully about how you're going to do your remembrance ceremony, the actual act of remembrance itself. I know that some places, certainly Coventry Cathedral, because we've got the ruins, some places go outside to do the act of remembrance. So think about how are the people with sight loss going to find their way outside? Where are they going to stand? Are we dealing with uneven pavements and uneven ground and stuff like that? Uneven ground is not necessarily a problem for a person with sight loss, but if the person with sight loss is also older or has mobility impairments of some description, that could really be a problem. And making sure they can hear. This is a problem that I have. When we're in the ruins at the cathedral, there's no PA system, so they're not talking into a microphone. So if I'm stood at the back of the congregation outside and the vicar has a quiet voice, whereas I think people who are sighted can probably read lips and figure out what's going on, I can't do that. And so as long as we're on script, we're fine. As soon as we go off script, I get very confused very quick.
Right. And also, one bit of this is, and I know we've discussed silences before on this show, is that 2 minutes of silence, because as long as you can hear clearly that that's going to happen, that's not a problem. And if you are outside and you can't hear the vicar, then obviously you might not always be aware, and you could be turning around and asking someone, oh, what's going on? Shh.
Yeah, it does happen. The easiest way to get around that problem, if you can find a trumpeter, that is the ideal setup, and it's certainly how I've experienced it in most of the churches that I've gone to for Remembrance Sunday, certainly in the Anglican Church. If you can find a trumpeter who can trumpet the last post and the Reveille, then get a trumpeter to do that, because that's a very, very clear sign that we're about to go into a 2-minute silence. Or maybe some churches will do a 1-minute silence. So again, just make it clear, are we doing 1 minute or are we doing 2 minutes? Are we going to wait until 11 o'clock? Because actually sometimes if your service is, ready, if we're ready for the silence at say 10:56 or 10:57, but we've decided we're going to wait till 11 o'clock before we actually observe the silence before the silence can actually be longer than the silence itself. So, it's not about which decision is the right one. It's about letting people know what decision you're going to make so they're not taken by surprise. I think the last thing I'd want to talk about in terms of remembrance is not necessarily about remembrance services themselves, but just the whole season of remembrance. I know that this is a time when people start to think about loved ones who've passed away, and might want to light candles and remember people. And some churches have lists around about this time, thinking sort of a little bit earlier on in the calendar of All Souls, have lists where you can list, people who you'd like to remember. It might be a good idea to proactively talk to people with sight loss about this, because it's very sensitive. And, you know that there's a list at the back of church that you can put a name on. But, if you're already sort of grieving someone or thinking about someone, the actual act of going up to a sighted person in the church and saying, can you help me light a candle? Can you help me put a name on a list? Actually, that just might be one thing too much. And it might be just easier just not to bother. So, get somebody to proactively say, do you want to remember anyone? Do you want to light a candle for someone? Do you want someone's name put on the memorial list? How do you want to deal with this? And if there's ever a time to be proactive, I think this sort of time of year when emotions are quite high is probably the time.
Very good call. And thank you so much for having educated me in this important service and this important day. As an ignorant foreigner, I just had no clue. I mean, we have versions of remembering people as well. It's just done differently. So, thank you. Lots of good points here.
If Remembrance Day feels unfamiliar to you, as it once did to Lynn, one way to connect with its meaning is to think about who the soldiers really were. Many of them were young boys, teenagers really, with little or no training, who went off to war alongside their fathers and uncles. Imagine someone you know, a teenage boy in your own life, a son, a brother, a nephew, a grandchild. It brings it closer to home, doesn't it? These were real people with names and families and dreams, and we remember them. I'm sorry to say this Remembrance Sunday episode of Reflections has come to an end. We hope it's given you something meaningful to reflect on. And don't forget, if you're blind or partially sighted and would like to learn more about any of the services provided by Torch, including the Hope for All project, our chaplaincy service, accessible books and resources, or our various groups, our client services team would be very happy to speak with you. The number to call for information or to request a song is 01858 438 260. That's 01858 438 260. Or you can email info@torchtrust.org. You can also find us on social media. Just search for Torch Trust on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram or YouTube. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Reflections, and so until next week, from me, Marilyn, and everyone on the Reflections team, goodbye and God bless.
You've been listening to Reflections from Torch Trust.